we want to tell you about another podcast from PRX called Monumental. This podcast explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley Seaford across the country with their team of journalists. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And welcome, folks, to Conventions Week. Now, regular listeners to this podcast will know that throughout the election year, we are doing some special series that look at the regular features of an election year. So we've done stuff on the also-run candidates, to Veep stakes, to more. And now we have come to conventions. The RNC already had their convention, as you know. It was quite the affair. And the Democrats are in Chicago pretty late in the calendar year to formally nominate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as their candidates. So we're going to talk about conventions. There's a lot to do this week. But the first thing I should say is, if you are listening to this, maybe you want to go watch this, because we're doing this as one of our video episodes that we do from time to time, putting it on the This Day YouTube channel. And so listeners, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel or go on YouTube, you can see our faces as we do this episode, or you can keep listening if you're listening in the good old podcast feed. But those faces, for those of you watching here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And Kelly is wearing a This Day t-shirt. So
yes,
always repping
nice.
the merch.
It's very nice. I like that yellow. Always repping the merch. The merch is also available on our website. And maybe we'll sell some merch at our live show in Boston on the 13th of September. So lots of things to plug here as we get into Conventions Week. But yes, tickets for that live show are available right now on our website, thisdaypod.com. Okay. Here is what we're going to do for Conventions Week. We're going to run some stories in subsequent episodes that we've done about conventions. Obviously, we've talked about conventions a lot on this show, but you're not going to get a ton of sober analysis, I would say, in this episode about this convention. We want to basically just make a list and have some fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 7 or so weird moments from conventions. Some of them we've touched on, some of them we've not. They're pretty silly, pretty random, but, you know, nomination conventions are kind of silly and kind of random. And we'll reflect a little bit on what it's like in the room, because I think they're a lot weirder than people realize. And so I think an episode where we say, let's pick some weird moments, actually is a pretty good way to capture what goes down at conventions. So you ready? You want to jump in with
let's
our
go.
Weird moments? Okay. So I'm going to take weird moment number 1, which is the 1924 DNC in New York City. So we've touched on this before. We did an episode, actually, I think in our Also Ran series, about this guy, Al Smith, who was a perpetual candidate and didn't get the nomination in 1924, but had a huge influence in kind of reshaping the Democratic Party, moving it in a more progressive direction. This convention was a sort of, I'd say, moment in which a lot of those fractures were coming out. And I guess we should also remind folks that conventions really were, up until fairly recently, the place where, like, the party nominees would emerge. Kind of all the business was it wasn't a fait accompli. It was like kind of where stuff would actually get hashed out. And stuff got hashed out in 1924 in quite a dramatic fashion. It was the longest convention ever. There were 100+ ballots that eventually led to the nomination of this random guy, John Davis, who basically, like, Al Smith and another candidate, they're going back and forth, and they can't, there's 100 ballots. And then they're finally like, well, how about this guy, John? John's like standing in the corner. He's like, wait, me? And they're like, yeah, John, how about you? And finally he sneaks through. But,
come on up.
It was a remarkable moment, you know, and happening in the heart of New York City.
Yeah, happening in the heart of New York City in the middle of summer, which also may have contributed to people finally, both people getting very, very stubborn, and then people deciding, oh my God, we have to decide on someone. Yeah. We want to go somewhere that is not so hot. We don't want to be stuffed into this convention center. So I think that the weather had a little bit to play into it.
Heat wave to make you cranky and short-tempered. And you no longer give any F's. You're just done. It's just done. I think they're like, fine, John.
John Davis, that's a real person, sure.
Yeah.
Well, Well, it was happening. It was over 100 degrees. It was in Madison Square Garden. And apparently the Barnum and Bailey Circus had just finished a run. And so the smell of that was still lingering in the air for people. So, yes, very weird convention. The other thing we should mention before we move on is that also the KKK was there. As a major force, 20,000 Klan members show up in the heart of Manhattan and try and disrupt it. And, John Meacham has kind of said, the historian John Meacham has said that actually 1924 is sort of the convention that most feels like it is analogous to, what we're going through right now.
24, I mean, that's peak of Klan membership. Yeah. They have like over 4 million members. Yeah.
And then maybe this is a coincidence, maybe not, but 2 years later, they knocked down Madison Square Garden.
They're like, we can't get the vibes right in here anymore.
We're starting over.
All right, let's move on. Let's go to weird moment number 2, weird convention moment number 2.
Oh, man. So this one, I didn't realize just how much optics matter. Because when you think about the first televised convention, this is 1948, people have not really seen how the sausage is made. And so for the first time, they're looking at this convention, the Democratic convention, no less. And they're like, yo, this is a circus. This is wild. It is packed full of people running all around. You have all of these people who are coming to speak to the podium that are not camera ready. The cameras have lights shining on them. They're sweating. One commentator had forgotten to shave. He's got like a 5 o'clock shadow. It's like, what are you doing? Clean it up. Like, no one was ready for the cameras. And I just think that's hysterical to me. But there's one quote I think that's really good. They're talking about just like what it looked to see, how the audience was like so shocked to see how the convention took place. And they basically said that it looked like a mixed setting of a country circus, a street carnival, and a medicine show on a 4th of July picnic. And I was like, yeah, that about captures it all. People were also doing like weird antics too, like Congresswoman Claire Booth Luce, who wanted to talk about inflation. And so she brings like a carton of milk and a steak up to the stage and like waves the steak around to talk about like inflation. And it's like, what? Why did she have a steak? And then she leaves the steak on the podium?
The steak on the podium. Like, that's the best part. Yeah.
I like the idea of bringing props, but I also think that this captures, a couple of things. One, I think we forget the idea of like how a person appears on television. There was no reference for it, right? People,
no social media
had TV in their phones or TVs in their homes. And so they just like, there wasn't an aesthetic that people were preparing for. And so you get these kind of images that don't play very well on television. But the other thing is, I've been to one convention, the 2016 Republican National Convention. And if you're not at the convention, the thing that you miss out on is the weirdness, right? Like these are political devotees, and it is a carnival and a circus and a party all rolled into one. And people like kind of let their freak fly a little bit.
Yeah. My observation at the conventions I've been to, I think I've been to 4, maybe 5, but it's similar to what you said, which is like you're kind of surprised at how rough around the edges it is. But then with the modern conventions, you also then at the same time, these are a little sort of at odds, but you also realize how much of a TV product it is. And basically from like, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., it is just like totally ramshackle, all the scenes of the show, whatever. And then all of a sudden, especially with modern conventions, obviously we're talking about the first televised one here. They didn't have their act together, but now, oh my gosh, they have their act together. And it is so, you have this, you have to cover it as something that's being produced for TV, not being produced for the thousands of people in the audience in that arena. And there's this weird disconnect. And I remember one of the first, this is probably a really simple technique, but I mean, it kind of blew me away when the first time I saw it. But I think it was at the 2008 Democratic Convention. Hillary was giving a speech. Maybe, Obama gave a speech at the big stadium, but in the arena, Hillary was giving a speech. And during the speech, floods of interns or campaign workers would go into the audience and hand out signs throughout the speech. And so they'd hand out a sign that said promise or something. And then 2 minutes later, Hillary Clinton would have a line in her speech that evoked that word, and then they would be able to cut to the audience, and everyone's holding up signs that tied to.
Wow.
And then they would come and collect all the signs and then hand out something else, that said "Jobs Now" or something, and it would be ready for the "Jobs Now" line a minute later. Super highly produced in that kind of
That's
way.
so, the performance of it all, the showmanship too. It's just like, I get it. You have to keep people entertained, because otherwise, a convention could be really boring. It could feel like a really long church service or something. Like, you want something that feels like you have people's attention. But at the same time, I think some of the antics, like when what is it? There's a woman named India Edwards who has a hat box and then opens it up and a balloon rises and she's like, "This is inflation." And you see the balloon rising and you're like, "Really? Are we doing this? Is this gonna get our attention?" Some of the antics, I think, are a little bit over the top, but what are you going to do when you're trying to keep a room of tens of thousands of people sort of engaged in what you have to say?
The best prop, though, in 48 is the doves.
Oh, yes. I don't know whose idea this was. So this to me is just hilarious. Someone thought it would be a good idea to release a dove to represent every single state. At the time, it was 48 states, so 48 doves. And of course, these doves get released and they're flying all over the stadium. And people are like, "Oh my gosh." If you're like me, I'm terrified of birds. I really don't like birds. I've been pooped on many times. It's just gross. And one of the newscasters is like, "Get those goddamn pigeons out of here."
Which, fair. It's not like they're out in the middle of a park.
Right. They're
in an enclosed space.
I know. Someone's going to get pooped on. It's not a good look.
And this, of course, where Truman is nominated, and it says right before Truman comes on, they release all these doves, and everyone's just pissed about the doves, and then he has to.
Because how are you going to catch them? How are you going to put that back in the box? You can't do that.
The pigeons are hanging out up there with that one balloon that got released.
They're up in the rafters.
We'll talk about balloons in a minute, because balloons obviously and balloon fiascos are a big part of the weird convention history. Hey there, Jody here, and I'm very excited to tell you that Wait For It is back for Season 2. Wait For It is one of the newer members of the Radiotopia family, but it is already one of the most acclaimed podcasts around. If I took the time to list every award and best of list that it has been on, we'd run out of time. So I'll just tell you that Wait For It is hosted by Ronald Young Jr. And by the way, Wait is W-E-I-G-H-T. And it tells not only his story, but the stories of all types of folks, fat and straight-sized, who can't seem to keep weight off their minds. This season features stories about grief, fat camp, air travel, as well as conversations with brilliant people like Martinez Evans and Aubrey Gordon of Maintenance Phase. The new season of Wait For It. It's audio storytelling at its very finest, and it launches September 5th. Congratulations to Ronald and the team, and congratulations to all of us for having a new season of Wait For It wherever we get our podcasts. Let's move on to weird convention moment number 3.
Yes. Speaking of conventions that might have smelled a little weird, 1968, the DNC in Chicago, it is something that people have talked about ad nauseum since it happened. It's much more famous for the police violence, for the fractures in the Democratic Party. But there were other more, let's say, weirder things going on at the DNC in 1968. And one of those was the nominee of the Youth International Party, the Yippies, who nominated Pegasus as their candidate for president. And Pegasus, as his name suggests, was a pig. And it was part of this kind of performance art protest that the Yippies were doing. This is actually kind of big in the symbolic politics of the late 1960s, that part of criticizing the system was to point out the ridiculousness of it. And so this idea of nominating a pig to be the candidate, but there's nothing in the rule book that says that a pig can't be president.
So,
and for people, go ahead.
Yeah, no, are you going to talk about the Yippies? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is this kind of like bigger political story in which this is happening. Because the Yippies were people you'll probably recognize their names, people like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. Pegasus was purchased by a Yippie by the name of Phil Oakes. You might recognize him as the folk singer who brought us "Love Me, I'm Liberal," among a number of other songs. But these guys would end up getting arrested, originally called the Chicago 8. And then demoted down to the Chicago 7. These are 7 activists who are put on trial for their activism around the 1968 campaign, for conspiracy, all of these different things. Nothing related to the pig, fortunately, but they were put on trial and ultimately all found not guilty by a jury.
And there is a little controversy. So yeah, so I think it's actually the other night I couldn't sleep and I just was like, oh, I guess I'll watch something to fall asleep. And I opened Netflix and the first thing that popped up was that movie, The Trials, the Chicago 7, which is solid. Aaron Sorkin. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I actually fell back asleep before I could see if Pegasus makes an appearance, but it does a very good job of painting the various strands along the left of the Yippies, who are much more in that sort of merry prankster, street art performance, and then the much more serious-minded SDS activists. And so they were all swirling around in Chicago around this time, inside the arena and out. They nominate this pig. Pegasus the Immortal is his name, which is important to keep in mind.
I forgot his title. I'm sorry. His honorific.
What happens to Pegasus? There is this nice little rabbit hole, a pig burrow that you can go down of. It's unclear whether any of for a while, I think there were rumors that some of the charges against the Chicago 7 did involve the pig, like transporting a live animal into the city of Chicago or something.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think that was ever formally part of it, but the pig was certainly part of the issue. Like when they arrested everyone, they had to figure out what to do with the pig. And there were rumors that a police officer ate him.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is not clear what happened to Pegasus. He was probably taken to a farm somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say, yes, he was taken to a farm upstate. And let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It just kind of, I mean, the mocking and the poking fun of sort of like jokes on you. You know, we can't take you seriously. So we're going to nominate a pig is really what the dig is all about.
Yeah.
And Nixon ultimately wins that election, and the Yippies hold an inauguration to inaugurate Pegasus, even though he had taken off for parts unknown.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right. Well, let's move on from Pegasus to weird convention moment number 4. Let's go to 1996. We're roughly going in chronological order here. 1996, and this is when the Democrats dance the Macarena. So I think a lot of people, this still sort of lives in that. It's in a meme right now, right? I mean, the video gets trotted out all the time. Obviously, it's Hillary Clinton. I think that people are seeing that pop into their head, Hillary Clinton dancing the Macarena. Well, first, let's start with the meme, actually. Do you think that it is a lovable meme, or do you think it's used to sort of mock Clinton in a unfair way?
I kind of think it's both.
Yeah. I think it's corny. And that's part of the reason why it gets circulated. But it's also, I mean, it is kind of making fun of like the unhip Democratic Party.
Yes.
And at the same time, like, it's so unhip that it kind of comes back around to, like, look at these guys.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious because it's like, for me, like dancing is so enjoyable and so much fun. And there's so much like hilarity that goes along with dancing too. Like maybe it's because I'm thinking about the Olympics and break dancing where I was like, oh my God. But like to me, when I think of people that are meant to be taken seriously, that are like in these sort of like high elevated positions, when I see them dancing, it's just comical because it's like, oh, you're a person and you have no rhythm. That's just funny. So
I think it's around the same time when Trent Lott and 3 other senators who were part of a kind of barbershop quartet sang at the Republican National Convention. And that was going around recently too. And there is something about like, you know, these are slickly packaged for television by the 1990s, but they are still, I don't know, they're just like a little less sleek than what we expect today. And I think that's part of the reason why it kind of catches on, because you're like, this would not happen today.
But Yes, but I think I disagree a little bit in that this moment, there are lots of like shaggy, awkward, corny moments that are like about the people in the room, and they don't really have self-awareness, but I have my barbershop. There was, I didn't put it in our list because I couldn't really verify it, but there was some reporting about one of Nixon's daughters singing at one of the conventions and it being pretty cheesy and cringy. And, it's like, yeah, my daughter, she sings, she's inquired. Like, let's put her on stage. But the Macarena thing, I think, is more than that. It is very much trying to kind of tap into larger culture. I think this is probably worth pointing out. It's just sort of how ubiquitous the Macarena is as a cultural force at that moment. And so obviously, yes, it's corny, but I think it also plays particularly corny because it was an attempt to tap into I don't know what. And that's part of the question. Like, what exactly were Democrats trying to do by saying
levity, the coolness,
we're going to have everyone dance the Macarena? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, even the dance itself with the like it's so much. There's like so much like movement and stuff. It's just hard to. I mean, I'll take the Macarena over other dances, I suppose, but like, it'd be really wild to see like people twerking on stage or something. I'm like, okay, stop right there. But it's wholesome. Anyway, your grandma.
It is
Macarena,
wholesome. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and for people who didn't sort of live through the height of the Macarena, and one thing is the Macarena is still out there. It's a kind of incredible how ubiquitous it is. I can attest to the fact that 7-year-olds now learn how to do the Macarena. But this is peak Macarena moment where everyone is doing the dance. It is just sort of saturated into the culture. And, there are some commentators who try and overthink it. There were people who called it out at the time as a little cheesy. There were other people who were like, this is the Democratic Party projecting a young, hip, energetic, multicultural image. I mean, the fact that Macarena is a Spanish language song, is worth lingering on. It's worth pointing out as one of the earlier moments when when Spanish language music broke through in that way. So the Democrats, I think, were trying to do something here. Funnily enough, the person who I think comes off looking the best because he looks the worst is Al Gore, who, if you look at those videos, Hillary Clinton's trying to dance. She's caught up in the moment. Everyone else is trying to dance. It's not going well. And Al Gore is like super stiff. And he's basically, after the fact, says he was doing a kind of mocking of himself and his reputation as being stiff, and kind of trying to do the Al Gore version of the Macarena, which is basically
a Macarena.
A Macarena. There you go. And so maybe people didn't get that joke and were just like, "Oh, Al Gore, look at him, he doesn't know how to dance." But there was some self-awareness there, which I think is kind of the story of Al Gore in general. A lot more of a subtle thinker than people tend to realize. He was pigeonholed into. I want to use this as a chance to talk about one other thing, which is a favorite little pet thing that I like to watch in presidential campaigns and especially at conventions. But it is like the inevitable run of political parties using music that they don't have permission to use, and then artists being like, what are you doing? Like, please take my song out of your,
actually pay me my money.
Or just like, I don't want to be affiliated with this, or don't use it. And frankly, it's happened a lot with Donald Trump lately. But it is like, sometimes I'll tune into a live stream of a Trump rally and I'll literally be like, all right, 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a letter from the person who wrote this song to the Trump campaign. Alanis Morissette is about, okay, Alanis Morissette, you're on the clock. Time to send a note to Donald Trump. But I don't know what happened with the Macarena. I'm sure that Los del Rio, I think is the name of the band. There wasn't a spat as far as we could tell. All right, final thing. Quiz for listeners. Maybe you know it. What song knocked Macarena off its incredibly long run at the top of the charts?
This is what year again? This is 96. Honestly, if I didn't have the answer in front of me, I would probably say something by MC Hammer. But maybe that's me thinking of like Too Legit to Quit or something like that.
Or by like Trish Yearwood, because that was a big like monster country album.
It is in fact No Diggity by Blackstreet.
Yes, No Diggity, No Debt.
Which honestly, a little swing. Honestly, I'll take that shift from Macarena to
man, that was a good one.
All right, folks, that is the end of this episode. We went for a long time when we were recording this History of Weird Moments, so we're going to break it into 2 parts. Part 2 is coming your way on Thursday. We'll get into a very awkward kiss, an empty chair, and lots more. But just between you and me, if you really can't wait, the whole thing is up on our YouTube page right now. Anyway, happy Convention Week. My name is Jody Avirgan. On behalf of Kelly and Nikki, thanks for listening, and we'll be back with part 2 real soon.
Radiotopia.